It's not about the job you do. It's about how you are when you're doing the job.
Hello, my name is Daniel Dollinger, and this is the Engineering Success Podcast, episode 52. Hope you guys are doing okay. Hope you guys had a good Thanksgiving. We had a good one here in Charlotte. We just went to IHOP. It was a good time. Had a great time. Hope you guys have had a great time with spending it with the people you care about. I sure got to spend it with my nuclear family, baby E, and my wife Madeline, who I love very much. Missed out on the extended family. Miss you guys, but we look forward to seeing you guys for the Christmas holidays. And this episode is going to be a good one. We have a great interview for you guys to listen to. Dennis Doran is a wonderful person, wonderful interview, and I actually had a blast filming it. And you're going to enjoy listening to it. Before we get into that, though, let's give a shout out to our top tier supporters. Shout out to John Ott and Leroy Jenkins. Thank you both for your support of the podcast. You too can become a top tier supporter through either Patreon or Spotify for podcasters. Links are down below. $10 a month gets you just a shout out of any phrase that's safe for work, your name. At this point, if you wanted to put your company on there, I wouldn't say no to that. And at the beginning of every single episode of the podcast, that helps me just keep the lights on, helps me pay for my domain for my website at www.engringsuccess.com, where you'll be displayed on my main page as a top tier supporter of the podcast. Also, it also helps me pay for my email address, daniel@engringsuccess.com, where you can write in if you have questions or you want to contact me for business things or you just want to be a guest on the pod. All those things you can contact me at my email. Anywho, I bet you guys are going to enjoy this interview. I know I enjoyed filming it. So without any further ado, I'll catch you on the other side of this break. Hello, my name is Daniel, and you are listening to the Engineering Success Podcast, episode 52. My guest on today's podcast, yes, I have a guest, is somebody who I admire and align with strongly due to our mutual love and respect for the values of soft skills on career development. Dennis Doran is a construction savant whose career includes executive roles in project management, construction, business consulting, professional development, and operations management. He has truly done it all in my industry. He's also a published author of the book Soft as Steel, Leadership Qualities to Grow Relationships and Succeed in Business Life, a book that, from its description, gives new leaders and career veterans alike the tools they need to not only evolve with the industry, but to shape it as it grows. He is an Accelerator Mastermind Program Chair of the Extreme Leadership Institute, an organization that helps organizations realize their potential by using radical cultural transformation tactics rooted in passion, support, and most importantly, love. And we will dig into that. Dennis is a wonderful speaker and interviewer, and I am so glad that the shoe is now on the other foot and I get to interview him for this podcast. Yes, I was a guest on his podcast, and his episode with my interview will be dropping shortly. His calling is to help people in the construction industry, yes, my industry, become more successful people by talking, teaching, motivating, and inspiring them about the roles of soft skills in our industry. Thank you, Dennis, so much for joining us on the Engineering Success Podcast. How are you doing today?
Daniel, I'm doing very well, and that sounded like one of the best. What's the word they use when you go to somebody's funeral?
Eulogies.
Yes, that was a good, very good eulogy. So thank you so much for that. The only small problem I have with it, and it's not really a problem, is that you refer to me as a savant, and I need to Google that to make sure I know what that means. But I imagine it's a positive comment coming from you because you're a very, very nice young man and a very gracious podcast host. So let's assume that means something good.
Savant, noun from Oxford Languages, a very learned or talented person, especially one distinguished in a particular field of science or the arts, according to Google.com. And that's what you are, a distinguished person with a very storied career. And something that I'm really interested in is your adventure in construction. How did you find your way into the industry? Because as somebody that does his research, I researched you, I stalked your LinkedIn and all your profiles, and I realized that you studied accounting in college, and then your LinkedIn goes then to all of your senior roles. So
Right.
I don't get to see that progression into construction from looking at your profile. So how did you actually find your way into construction as a whole
Yeah.
and realize it was the
Well,
industry for you?
right. Well, that's certainly a good question. So I graduated from the University of Maryland in 1975 with a bachelor's in accounting. Went to work for a small local firm initially as an accountant, doing accounting work, audit work, tax work, the standard fare of being an accountant in an accounting firm or practice. And then I went to work for a larger regional firm, and then eventually I moved from being an accountant on a day-to-day basis. I moved into the consulting practice of a actually it was one of the, at the time, was referred to as the Big Eight, the eight largest accounting and consulting firms globally. And I went to work for one of those firms in their consulting practice. And what I took with me into their consulting practice was an exposure to the construction industry by virtue of having done audits on a couple of contractors and a couple of material suppliers. And actually, and this is in the early 80s, I audited a company that at the time was one of the few companies that manufactured vinyl windows. Now today, that's a pretty standard material used in what would be labeled probably the lower end from a quality standpoint of windows, or the most cost efficient might be a nicer way to say it. And then you move up and you go to the Andersons and the Pellas and all that kind of stuff. But that was my first exposure. And then while I was at the consulting firm, I did a consulting engagement for an individual who owned 4 different companies. 2 were construction companies and 2 were materials suppliers. So I got that initial exposure. After a period of time, I decided that I wanted to leave the very large firm I was with, and I thought at the time, being full of myself at the age of 23 or 24, that I don't need to stay at this big firm and I make good money, blah blah blah, but I'm going to do it on my own. In hindsight, that was a mistake, but that's a whole other conversation. So I left and I started my own consulting practice, and I did that with the direct aid of this particular individual and his 4 companies, because he liked what I had done for them. And he said, I'd like you to continue to be associated with my companies, and so why don't we negotiate some kind of a retainer agreement? So I was one of those lucky people, and it happens occasionally today, maybe even more often than I think it does. But back then, if somebody wanted you to do something and you said, well, let's talk about a retainer, that could be a very expeditious way to suddenly find yourself in business. And that's what I did. So that's how I started. And from there, I just had a connection to the construction industry with the contracting company. And I was their vice president of business development for a period of time. And then just kind of, migrated a bit, left that company after a while. Started again another consulting practice that followed the work I'd done from them. So my connection construction started over 40 years ago, and then in earnest, it really began when I was in the consulting practice, where I was doing things like strategic planning, operations analysis, and those kinds of things for both contractors. And then I kind of expanded the window a little bit at the time to include owners. Again, what are referred to in most literature, even today, I think it would be described this way: a company that does not have as their core business construction, but has capital programs ongoing, is referred to in some circles as a serial builder. Hotel companies are a good example of that. Petroleum companies are another great example, like some of the projects that you've done with Zachary. Their big clients are serial builders. They're always building, renovating, updating, renovating, structures and systems all the time. And so that was the beginning of it, and I just continued on in that vein. And then probably about 20 years ago, as I mentioned earlier, I had this, watershed awakening. I don't know what it was actually when I think about it, but I went to a 1-week leadership program. And I went to one that was conducted by a firm at the time I was employed by, but I attended this institute as a participant. And it was a rigorous 1-week program, great learning experience. And at the end of the week, after they began the week by giving us, all the participants, a series of different types of assessments and tests, a couple of simple examples. One is something called the DISC behavioral assessment, DISC, a very widely used, very good assessment tool. We did a Myers-Briggs, which is another one, and we did something called the Highland Battery, which was a series of different tests that measured different levels of ability or interest in a variety of skills and competence areas. So it was a whole bunch of really good information. And the last thing they did at the end of the week is that you met with a coach. And so I'm a participant. I walk into one of the conference room. The coach comes in and greets me, shakes my hand, said some very nice things to me just as a greeting. And then we sit down, and he sits across the table from me. He says, "So, Dennis, let me ask you, if you could do anything that you wanted to do, and just don't think about it too much, just give me an answer. What would you do?" And I answered without any hesitation whatsoever: game show host.
That would be amazing. That's
Game
such a
show
great.
host.
That's such a great answer.
I was waiting for you to respond. You could have laughed. That was a laugh opportunity there,
No,
Daniel.
I want to be a game show host too.
Oh,
I
okay. Well,
agree.
then you have a better chance. So you got a bunch more years to try to get the gig. But that's what I said, and that really speaks, volumes to what I am today, which is a guy that carries a message, does it in a way that people in some cases are intrigued by. As I say in my different verbiage, I talk about informing, educating, motivating, and maybe inspiring people about the value and importance of soft skills. Because I believe for the last 20 years, as I've been carrying this message, that ultimately took me to that place back in 2019 when I wrote my book. But I know increasingly, and to this day, my opinion about this hasn't changed, and that is, and I found a variety of ways to express it. And the most recent way I express it is to say that it's not about the job you do. It's about how you are when you're doing the job. And that hints very heavily towards the fact that you could be the best at something in a technical, administrative, operational sense, but if you can't communicate with people, if you can't recognize the importance of the people that you work for, that you work with, and most importantly, at the end of the day, if you're in a business that intends to generate revenue and produce a profit by being successful in serving their clients, if you don't have clients, you don't have business. And what's common to all that, it's about two human beings learning about each other, and over a period of time developing a mutual sense of trust, which doesn't happen instantaneously. Anybody that says that you can look somebody in the eye and say, I can already tell, Daniel, that I can trust you. They're being silly or foolish or something else, but they're not being sensible about the reality that whatever industry you're in. And again, I love the construction industry for all of the things that I've said already, and for the simple fact that I get such pleasure when, as an example, I'm teaching a class on project management fundamentals, and I have a bunch of students in my class who are glazers. And for the listeners that may not be aware, there's a glazer is someone that works with glass, that puts the exteriors on buildings, that fabricates things with steel tubing, and it's a really interesting sub trade. And they talk about being proud of what they've done, and taking their kids on a Saturday into downtown anywhere, Houston, Philadelphia, and pulling up in front of a building and saying, "Your dad put all this stuff on the outside of this building." And he didn't do it by himself, but I was up there, all the way up at that top floor, and they do it with such joy because because construction is about creating things, even if they're purely functional things and necessary things that I would label infrastructure. They make things that benefit people, and so why not treat each other like people? And when I was 50, I realized how important it was to talk about that. I felt that I was pretty good at doing it myself, but I didn't understand everything about myself until that event, until I went to that leadership institute. I didn't know things about myself, such as the following. I didn't know that I am an auditory learner. And again, you're an intelligent young man, so I know you know what that means. But for your listeners, that means that the way I learn, the way I add knowledge to my accumulation, to my wisdom base, or however you want to call it, to my database, is more through what I hear than what I see. And that explained, and was confirmed by one of these coaches, that explained why when I was growing up, there wasn't a lot of focus in my early years, my very early years, by my parents on reading books. So again, and again, I know you understand this, the idea that, from the time we're born until literally, maybe for you, in your case, absolutely every moment that you're living right now. For me, I'm probably a little less on the picking extra stuff up, but I'm still doing it. I learn stuff every day. But all of your experiences, all the things that you see, all the things that you hear, all the things that you're taught, from the littlest things, like be able to put a square peg in a round hole as you're learning something about dexterity and shapes, that all that stuff forms who you are. And in my case, I didn't get a lot of work in my direction on reading. So I was good at listening. So at the age of 50, I finally was able to reduce, or certainly reduce, maybe even eliminate the guilt that I had carried for literally from my early adult years until 50, because I was one of those guys that, again, I was in a suit and tie industry for a good number of years in the beginning of my career. And so I was one of those folks who went to some kind of a gathering, could be an association meeting, could be a cocktail party. And in particular, the cocktail party end of the world, then, and this is back, a long time ago, everybody was talking about the latest book they read. That was kind of, if you wanted to have if you wanted a conversation starter, that was a good starter question. So when somebody would say, well, so what are you reading now, Dennis? And I would just like to say, I said, excuse me, I need to get another drink. And I would just be able to walk away because I wasn't a reader. And I felt bad about that. One of the things that we do as humans is that we make ourselves feel bad about ourselves. And many times there's no good reason for it. Yeah. But there's an absence of a good reason not to feel badly about ourselves. We call this self-awareness. We call this self-understanding. And so that was an interesting process for me to use that information to help me figure out the reason why I express what soft skills are in the manner that I do.
Yeah. So was that institute that you referred to the Extreme Leadership Institute?
No, it was an institute run by an organization, a consulting firm out of Raleigh, North Carolina, a very successful, long-standing firm that's now referred to as FMI, by three initials. When I went to that institute, they were still, the folks that were senior in that firm were still referring to it as it was referred to when it was founded by a Dr. Emil Fales, a professor at North Carolina State University, I think. And it was called the Fales Management Institute. But they then abbreviated and made it FMI to change their branding. The Extreme Leadership Institute came in much later in my life, really like 10 years ago. And that was maybe it was more like 12 years ago. And that was at a time where I had an opportunity in my role at the Construction Management Association of America, one of the stops that you saw in my profile, where I was the Vice President of Professional Development. I was involved in identifying individuals to engage as keynote speakers. And I identified, because I had picked up this book and read it, and then listened to some of his online stuff, I recommended a guy named Steve Farber, who's a fairly well-known, he'd probably say really well-known, but I would say fairly well-known, but a very credible expert on leadership. And I saw and read his first book that was entitled The Radical Leap. And LEAP is an acronym that stands for 4 words. And you hinted earlier that one of these words you want to talk about. And the first letter in LEAP is an L, which might stand for
love.
All right. The second letter is an E that stands for energy. The third is an A that stands for audacity. And the fourth is a P that stands for proof. And so in this book, written in a fable format, part reality, part fiction, he talks about these 4 elements as being the elements that define a person as an extreme leader. which he very carefully says and very quickly says doesn't mean they're extreme at all. It simply means that they are real leaders. And then he goes on to talk about that. So I met him, and after I read his book, we reached out, we engaged him, and I met him for the first time when he came to keynote at an event that I was involved with. And he and I made a connection, and we've been friends ever since. I am a certified facilitator in his Extreme Leadership Institute, which means that I deliver programs based on his body of knowledge, programs that I align with very easily, and believe that his concept of leadership makes a huge amount of success. So we'll talk more about that, since again you mentioned love, and so let's see what else with Steve. And he was, when I wrote my book in 2009. This conversation is going all over the place, don't you think?
No, it's going exactly the way it needs to go.
Just me talking.
Exactly.
Yeah, my older son, who I think he's a little bit older than you, but not much. He works for a general contractor. He likes to remind me of his amazement. He said, "Dad, I can't believe that people pay you to talk." So,
I believe it, and I'll let people know at the end how they can contact you if they want to. So
yeah,
let's talk about that. Actually, let's talk about love.
yeah.
You mentioned love. Why is love such a focus of yours and Steve's emphasis on soft skills and that of the Extreme Leadership Institute? Because that one for me, the other ones I can understand, and
Yeah.
I we get different messaging about how we treat business and
Yeah.
with
Well,
with our personal, but
yeah,
why love?
yeah. Well,
Why leading with love?
let me put a few stakes around this with some more current. Again, I mentioned I'm learning things all the time, and it was probably a week to 10 days ago, and I forget what media it was on, but I saw a quote that was attributed to both Steve Jobs and Warren Buffett. Now, I'm sure every person listening to your podcast knows who Steve Jobs and Warren Buffett are.
I hope
And
so.
I hope so too. Well, they're engineers, so they might not listen to Steve Jobs or Warren Buffett, because engineers are smarter than most people. Never mind. That was my engineer humor. That's the end of my humor on engineers. But Steve, but Steve Jobs and Warren Buffett both they agreed fully that there were 4 words that an individual to be successful needed to have in their vocabulary. 4 words: do what you love. So let's start on that end. That's pretty specific. That's pretty direct, pretty comprehensible, and it has the word love in it. And then you take that phrase and you take the set of phrases that I use. I think I mention these in almost every podcast that I do, because I'm so connected to them, and I have such a strong feeling about them. There's a hint, and those are Steve Farber's words from his first book, where he says, "Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do." Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. What a great agnostic prescription for how to approach whatever it is that you're involved in. It doesn't have to be a business, doesn't have to be at your church, doesn't have to be in a civic association. Anything that you're involved with, that you have that feeling about, that's the way to do it. And then I think the Buffett and the Jobs thing, I think, just is magnificent. I mean, if you want to be successful, so all the young engineers and would-be engineers that are listening to your podcast, if you want to be successful, don't let your decision about what you do be driven by the paycheck or the offer or the package of benefits. Don't let it be driven by that. Let it be driven by figuring out in some sensible way, and it may take effort to do it, what you really have, some basic competence or qualities already in your makeup that would suggest you'd be good at one thing or another. Find out what kind of a learner you are, because if you're a tactile learner, which means you learn by doing things, that might be a strong hint that a place for you to go is someplace where you'll be using your hands. That doesn't mean directly to the place which I would mention right away, which is in construction. That would be the trades. If you like doing stuff with your hands, you know that about yourself. But if you're not paying attention to it in the context of what does that mean for what I do in that part of my life that involves me earning a living, because when I say, don't do it for the money. Again, by that I really mean don't do it because you know what the money is and it seems to be good, or it seems to be satisfactory. Because if what you're going to do for whatever amount of money is not something that you feel going into it is something, and this is a phrase that people are more familiar with, something you will enjoy.
Yeah.
And when taken into a work setting, you may continue to enjoy it. Just elevating it to love is something you can experience, and it simply means that and particularly as a person who ultimately gets into a leadership role, which is where his phrases about doing what you love were originally. The first audience are leaders, and again, there are leaders at all different levels in organizations. In particular, for a leader, the fact that they have that kind of a feeling that they take into their leadership role, that means that they are able to cultivate a strong feeling on the part of the people that they lead. So if you cultivate love, that generates energy. Again, I'm playing out his acronym. That does, just think about something. And it's, any one of your listeners, just think in your mind about something that you really love doing. Something you really love. For you, it's probably playing golf.
It is. It
Right.
is, which is
So,
what was the inspiration behind me going into the engineering industry in the first place, is my love of golf and designing golf clubs. And then I realized that maybe that wasn't the industry that I wanted to work in, but
mhm,
I loved the process behind the design and
mhm,
understanding it. And I think it's so true. I mean, the most common question, maybe you know this about me, I troll through the subreddits for engineering students and aspiring engineering students. It's where I find listeners
mhm,
and just engage in discourse. And the most common question I see on there is, which engineering major should I do? And they're like, well, I know that this one pays more, and
mhm,
chemical engineering or process engineering or uh, computer science. I want to go to
mhm,
computer science because it makes more. Well, the
mhm.
industry's always turned. The industry's always changed, but what won't change is what you're most passionate about. So I always say, well, what are you most interested in? That is what you should pursue, and then the rest of it will come, because you're only going to be the best version of yourself if you pursue a career in something that you enjoy. The more
Right.
you enjoy something, the better the product will be. So,
Exactly.
yeah,
Exactly. Yeah. So I mean,
yeah,
that all makes sense. So coming back again. So the reason I talk about love so much, it also has a broader implication. Again, I describe it as being a strong feeling about something or someone. And so when you think about it, just in terms of building relationships, in my four pillars, if you were to refer to them that way, that flows into my podcast. It's part of what came out of my writing in my book, and it's part of all my speeches. I talk about love, which we're doing now. I talk about inclusion, which is again it's about people. I talk about social justice, which is also about people, and then I talk about leadership. And leadership is not something that is a box at the top of an organization chart. Uh, and so when you talk about great leaders, they're in all parts of organizations. Some of the most capable, and I would even stay at their stage in their careers, great leaders are people that are superintendents, foremen, in some cases even crew leaders, because they approach what they do with this love, which generates a good feeling, which we can call energy, among the people that they are responsible for, that on a day-to-day basis, crew leader, foreman, superintendent, general superintendent, they all, every day, a big part of what they do is manage. They manage production. They manage putting work in place, getting work done. That's kind of the fundamental part of it. But every day as well, because they have a relationship with a number of individuals who together have to work together to produce results, they also have to provide leadership, and that leadership starts with the feeling that they convey to the people they're responsible for, that could be stated as simply as that they care about them. They do simple things like make sure that each day, if they have the opportunity, and they're there first thing in the morning, that they offer them a greeting. Just as they're gathering to start work, if there's not a toolbox talk that morning, just something as simple as saying, "Daniel, it's really good to see you. How was what'd you have for dinner last night?" Just something silly. Some people would argue, "Oh, I don't have time for that. I got to check on my iPad to see what they've downloaded overnight. I got to do this. I got to do that." Well, I agree with all that management stuff, but again, if you want to get the best results out of people, they have to be motivated. And leadership as a principal task, motivating people is a central, basic, foundational aspect of leadership. And if you learn how to do it early, and then carry that up as you move through your organization and take on more and more responsibility, good things will happen for you, and also good things will happen for the people that you lead. So again, the love part is about energy, about intensity. And that's palpable if you're good at it, if you recognize that that's something that is a good thing for me to do. And the way I do it is not simply by what I don't just go in and say, "Hey guys, rah rah, we're gonna have another great day. I know it's pouring rain outside, and we're gonna be outside all day today, but rah rah." I'm not talking about that. That's BS. People can see a person for what they are. If individuals think, it's sometimes you hear the phrase, I couldn't read so and so. I never really knew where he was coming from. Well, that doesn't mean that the information wasn't all there for you to see. It just means that you didn't have a sense in your mind as what do I need to be paying attention to? Because nobody's explained it to you. No, nobody may have explained to you that that the 2/3 of the impact of words that go back and forth between two people that we refer to as messages, the 2/3 of the meaning of those messages is your eyeballs and your face, and maybe what you're doing with your hands. It has nothing to do with the words or how they're spoken. It's the visual, nonverbal part of communication. And if nobody ever explained that to me, and I've explained it in classes, and everybody gets it as soon as you explain it, and I'll also ask the follow-on question: does that make sense to you? Does that seem like this sounds ridiculous? You're saying 2/3? Or the majority of how I feel about what a person is saying to me is based on the look on their face or how they wave their hands around. Say, yeah, that's exactly what it is. So you need to pay attention to their hands and their eyes. And most importantly, if you're the leader and you want to make sure you're connecting with each of the people that you're responsible for, in an individual or in a group setting, that you do something as simple as make sure that you make eye contact with that person or those people that you're talking to in a small group. Just to make that connection and expect their eyeballs to be shining back at you. And if they are, that gives you the indication that at least possibly, not definitely, but possibly, they're listening to what you're saying. And listening is an important skill that every human being needs to practice on every day, because nobody's perfected it yet. Nobody's gotten to the point where there's not one bit of disagreement on what the message was, what the intent was. We haven't gotten there yet, and we probably won't ever get there, but we don't need to. But we need to have in our minds that we want to do everything we can to make sure is that we have our day-to-day interactions with people that report to us, if we're in a management and leadership role, that we do everything we can that's reasonable in order to be sure that we don't have misunderstanding. Because misunderstanding, when you add a little bit of emotion to it, becomes conflict. And conflict happens, and disagreements and conflict are going to happen because we're humans. But if we understand more what the dynamic is and what we can do on our side, and also try to do something about the other person in a positive way, we have an opportunity to develop some better results through better relationships.
Yeah. So a couple big things that I picked up on there is again 2/3 of the way that somebody communicates to you is nonverbal. I think that's a big takeaway for the audience to be more aware of. If you want to be an effective leader, you need to be more aware of how not only other people are communicating to you nonverbally, but also whenever you want to be a good listener, you need to be aware of how you're communicating to people nonverbally.
Yes.
That's how people will interpret that. And another thing I heard from you talking about is just the importance of listening, and the importance of listening for understanding, and listening with your eyes, with that eye contact as well. So that's two big things I took away. And the young aspiring leaders, the early career engineers, the kids in high school that have long-term aspirations of being leaders that they can take away. Are there any other things that you would encourage somebody that's early in their career to focus on, if they want to act like somebody that's going to be a leader one day in their
Mhm.
organization professionally? What can they be doing now to grow in those ways? Maybe those things or beyond
Yeah.
those things.
Yeah. The two easiest things are, and this sounds like a general thought, but I'll give you a specific action. Learn more about yourself as a person. Learn more about what people see in you. And that's a hint towards the idea there are a variety of personality or behavioral assessment instruments out of the marketplace. The one that I recommend, and the one that I've used for over 20 years is referred to as the DISC behavioral assessment, DISC. You can find them online for free. All it costs you is you typing in your email address, and they put you on a mail list that you can then unsubscribe from later. The people at the publishing company who I purchased mine from probably wouldn't like hearing me say that, but students, don't always have a lot of money. But that framework gives you a very specific set of words that describes you to you. And most often people read those words and say, okay, I understand this is who I am, but what does that mean for me? And then usually in these free assessments, they give you some information about what does it mean to you? What do you need to be concerned about? What situations are you better in than other? So learn more things about yourself just from a personality standpoint. Learn more about emotional intelligence. And again, that's easy to do. All you got is Google it, or you can type in a question in ChatGPT. Say, what are the things I need to know about emotional intelligence at the age of 22? And you'll get an answer. It might be a pretty detailed answer. It might be a very informative answer. So generally, learn more about yourself. It's not about the job you do. It's about how you are when you're doing the job. Um, and then again, at every age, we have someone. If you ask the question, tell me about somebody in your life that was really important to you. There was somebody that was really helpful to you, whether it was in school or it was in athletics or any of those kinds of things. Somebody that you really looked up to. And what I'm describing is someone was a leader. But again, describing in more generic terms, so people can grab on and say, oh, "Let me think about that." And they may come up with like a baseball coach in 10th grade, or a hockey coach, or the captain of the debate team, or a biology professor or instructor, someone like that. Or in many cases, the answer I get from a fair number of folks when I ask that question, it's usually somebody related to them, and if it's a male, it's usually their father. But I think it doesn't have to be. It certainly doesn't have to be. So, and then what was it about that person that was really helpful to you? And so you can reflect on yourself, and what you value. And you're not going to say things like, well, I mean, here's my baseball coach, and he could throw batting practice for like an entire day without stopping. You're not going to say something like that. You're going to say something like, he was really patient with me. The way he taught me how to hold a bat, the way he taught me how to run. If I was only 6 years old, and I remember the coach that taught me how to run because I was running the wrong way. I was running up on my toes, and that's what little kids do. So any of those kinds of things, the net is at any stage, you need to know more about yourself, because knowing more about yourself will give you the ability to be able to understand other people better. And it will also contribute to you trying to formulate in your mind where should I go from a potential career standpoint. And I think you did it eloquently when we talked previously, but it really boils down to construction industry. It boils down to really maybe three groupings, but I'll just put it into everything that happens, that's not operations in nature. Putting work in place is a term I would use, and the other things. So if it's engineering, construction management, project management, that's all critical roles. But the skill set and the qualities or abilities necessary to do that are different than they are for someone that's going to do work, go through an apprenticeship program, or again, some experience in a high school or technical school or college setting, and learn the technical aspects of the physical work involved in any one of the disciplines. You also have engineers in. So if it's mechanical or it's HVAC or it's plumbing or electrical, you go to electrical apprenticeship. And the good thing about those apprenticeship programs is they will help you understand if this is what you want to do. And while you're trying to figure that out, if you step into a program like that, most, if not all, those programs, and increasingly because of legislation at the federal level, apprenticeship programs are going to be expanding, because many people recognize that there are a variety of paths, there are a variety of forms and levels of education and training that are necessary for a wide range of career paths. I just care about construction. So that's there for construction. And so you get into an apprenticeship program. It's usually a 3 or 4 year program, and while you're doing the apprenticeship program, you're on the payroll of a contractor, because so that's the deal. If you go to an apprenticeship program, they put you on the payroll. You go to the apprenticeship classes, and most of what you learn about the tools and the trade is learned now in the same manner it was learned 3 or 4 generations ago, and that is and the acronym is OJT, on-job training, and that's as true today as it was decades ago. The only difference is today and going forward, some of the things you'll be trained on in an apprenticeship program involve using robotics or virtual reality or some other kind of a digital tool. That'll be things that are going to be coming into the skill sets that are developed at the hands-on level. Because again, it's using a robot instead of using you to lift heavy pieces of glass. And again, but you have to drive the robot, and you will be taught how to do that. And that's something that doesn't change. You will do that with your hands, just as you would if you were picking up the material yourself. Now you're using a proxy, and that proxy is a lot stronger than you are.
Yeah, that's exciting. So we talked about a couple of things there. We talked about what engineering students what they should focus on, right? If they're interested.
Do you know why I'm laughing? Do you know why I'm laughing? Because
Why are
I'm
you
blabbing
laughing?
on here. Because I'm just so excited to be. I'm just blabbing on here, and then so out of my blab, you got 2 things. But that's
No,
good. So
no, I got multiple. I got more than one thing. But let's talk about the first part. The first part
edit.
was
Oh, you can edit this, so don't worry about it. Just keep going.
that's the whole beauty of it. It's all uncut, unfiltered.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. That's what the whole point of a podcast is, right? But we
Yeah.
talked about the things that people need to focus on when
Yeah.
they're in high school. We talked about, well, I don't even remember the question that was that prompted this. I think we were talking about the things that high schoolers could focus on now, right?
Yeah.
Is
No. No.
no,
No.
that was a question ago.
Do not
I
edit
heard
this laughing out. Do not edit this out.
no.
You're
There's
supposed
a
to be
dog
asking
whining
me
in
the
the
question.
background that's
You
just
don't even know
driving
what
me
the questions
insane.
are. I mean,
Yeah.
and I'm just answering questions that may not even been posed. But it's good stuff.
Yeah,
It's
it is. It is. It is. I think were we talking about the characteristics of great leaders? We were talking about, anyways. We there.
the question was, what is your advice about something that young people need to focus on
Yeah,
early on
that
in
that
their
that
career?
was the question that I was describing that I
Yeah,
asked. Yeah,
yeah, you
what
did.
they need
Yeah,
to focus on. Okay,
and
I had
I
it right.
answered that in a very expansive way.
Yeah. But you also talked about the second part. You talked about was realizing if it's for you and the type of training that you'll get. And I think that's a great pitch to people that are considering the industry, because a lot of people. And the one thing we talk about, and unfortunately, my most trending video on YouTube right now is why is the engineering dropout rate so high? Is because you have people that are interested in engineering because it's a cool thing and they like the things that engineers do, but some people they just not. And the math's not for them, or the physics it doesn't connect. Or I mean, physics too, just hard. Differential equations. What are those? What are
Mhm.
those? And you realize, well, I still want to be in this industry. Well, hey, there's another way. There's another way to get involved in the industries that engineers work in, and that's by working in construction, working on the field, working with your hands, and also you as you mentioned, we have some of our most important frontline leaders that are getting things done in our country are those foremen, those crew leads, those superintendents that are out in the field. Those are leaders. I'll tell
Mhm.
you, they're making more money than the engineers. So,
They are.
it's a great way to go, and I really appreciate the way that you framed up the construction industry as well. That's a pun. Framed up the construction
That
industry,
was
and
fun. It was funny. I was going to laugh loud out loud, but it was good. It was funny.
yeah, and we talked about the characteristics, the things that engineers should focus on whenever they
Hmm.
want to grow as a leader. So let's close our conversation on leadership by talking about we talked about good listening. We talked about
Hmm.
understanding nonverbal communication. When you've worked with engineers, when you've worked with leaders, this isn't something that you encourage people to do, is think about people that were good leaders in their life. I want to kind of put you through that exercise as well.
Hmm.
Beyond what we've talked about today, what are some of those characteristics that you've observed working in the context of construction and engineering that are characteristics of great leaders in our industry?
It may sound like I set you up for, for giving you this answer already before you asked it, but the people that I recognize as being great leaders, almost to a person, and I actually have someone in my mind's eye right now that I've known for probably for about 16 years, and he had a profound effect on me. But ironically, yesterday he sent me a text message telling me how grateful he is that he has me in his life, which is humbling because he's a great man. Um, but great leaders, um, first and foremost, care about the people that they lead. And it doesn't matter what time it is. It doesn't matter what decade it is. It doesn't matter whether it's pre or post pandemic or in the middle of the pandemic. Um, they care about the people that they lead. And the way they demonstrate that caring is fairly simple, and that is that they behave in a way and they use words that let people know that it's not just about getting to the next meeting. It's not just about getting out to the golf course. Um, but they are watched closely. That's the thing about leaders, and everybody I think knows this. If you're a highly visible leader in an organization, particularly at the upper levels of an organization, but this is true even if you're a general superintendent, which means you have other superintendents working for you along with foremen and crew leaders. If you're sitting in that position, you're hot, you're visible, you're out there. Even when you're not there, you're out there. Did you hear what the boss just came up with? He got some crazy ass idea, blah blah blah. So leaders are watched all the time for what they do and for what they say. And if they do things that contradict having a fundamental caring, or if you want to kind of take a little bit of the emotion out of it, the non-emotional version of caring is treating people with respect. So if you can't go to caring, you can start at treating people with respect, and great leaders do that. But the greatest of them care, and that's where they put their feeling, they put themselves into the role, and know that if they convey that, it's going to make a difference to the people that they lead. Um, the second is, and we've talked about it fairly extensively because it's that important. I refer to communication as the ultimate core competence, not just for leaders, but for everyone. But in many leadership surveys, among the top qualities is either good communicator, good or great listener, is in the top, in many cases, the top five. Things like that you would expect to be there to be there are important, and that is being trustworthy. And if you're a leader that has the people just you watch what just listen carefully what he says, because he's going to contradict himself tomorrow. That's his pattern. That's just the way he is. That's not the kind of leader you want. Being trustworthy means that over a period of time, and in the eyes of the person making the decision about whether you're worthy of their trust, they have seen and heard things that demonstrate that you're an honest person, that you possess integrity, which means that your words and your actions support one another, that you're ethical, and again, the icing on the cake is that you care. I mean, you can get into all kinds of other stuff. I mean, that's not the set of qualities of a great leader, but I don't think it's a bad one to work with, and that's the one I talk about most often.
It's a good list. It's a great icing on top of the cake to summarize the conversation that we've had on leadership, and those are some great characteristics for people to focus on. And when I listen to those things, I reflect on, okay, how do these things line up with my own core values and my own core competencies? And we've already learned that I have some work to do in the area of listening, but I'll tell you, respect is my number one core value. I, there's a lot going on here. The nice thing is that theoretically my microphone filters out that barking. Now, could I have left the dogs outside? Yes, I could have left them outside,
That's all
but
right.
they're hopefully they won't get picked up, and hopefully, and they doesn't seem like they distracted you too much. So
No,
you did
I agree with most of what they had to say. I mean, it's just,
a
and frankly, they were staying more connected to this conversation than you were. I mean, just,
they're like, oh, leadership. What?
yeah,
Let me.
I got him fired up a little bit there. So I apologize for any of that, but at least I didn't wake up the baby. The baby's okay. How,
She's in the next room over, so she may
how
or
old is
may
she?
not.
How old
Five
is she?
months. 5 months. Yeah,
Man,
yeah,
wow,
yeah.
5 months.
Yeah,
Yeah.
she's got that softest steel baby skin. Uh,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. Softest. That could be funny. That could be funny if it was, but it wasn't. Uh,
Okay. Well,
yeah.
speaking of softest steel, I wanna close out by kind of I really appreciate your time on here and sharing your wisdom and sharing your stories and lessons on leadership and soft skills. One day I decided I was going to write a book using Chat GPT, and that got canceled. Like everybody was like, "Don't write a book using Chat GPT. That's a bad idea. It's disrespectful to real authors." And yeah, it is.
Uh-huh.
So you're a real author. So
Yeah.
tell me more about your book, Soft as Steel.
Yeah. Well, again, I think you describe it. You described it well in the introduction. Um, my intention was to try to learn from other people. What qualities are important. I define a soft skill as not really being a skill. It really is your personal qualities, attributes, your behaviors, a manifestation of your personal values. Those are the words I use to say what a soft skill is. So I wanted to learn about what people thought their most important qualities were. So I gave a bunch of folks a big long list. They boiled it down to their 20 most important to them. I just kind of went through and synthesized all that. And when I got to the end of the process, with no surprise, number one on the list of the 20 most important qualities was trustworthy. It sat where it should be and was followed or really expanded upon by other words like honesty, integrity, ethics. Another word which I love and I think is a good word in the construction is authentic. And then from that, I then framed a few questions, and I posed the questions to, I think I interviewed like 30 some folks, and asked them a series of questions. As an example, one of the questions was, and I was careful to phrase it this way: when you hear the word soft skills, what does that mean to you? And in the book, I report in verbatim quotes the answers that a number of people gave me. So there's a lot of verbatim content, a lot of the words of the people I talked with that I refer to as conversation partners. And my intention was to create a book that would be conversational, that could be read by a first year apprentice or an entry level project engineer, or the CEO of the largest construction company in the United States or in the world. I do know that one very large construction company's CEO has in fact read my book, and he just read it recently before I interviewed him for my podcast. So I was delighted to hear what he had to say about it. So that was the idea, and I really was moved or motivated to write the book, not for the pure purpose of writing a book, which I thought would be, frankly, a nearly impossible task for me to accomplish. But I was talking to my mentor, Steve Farber, and I said, I've been thinking about writing a book. And he kind of cut to the chase. He said, well, do you have something that they think you want to say and that's worth trying to say something to people about? I said, yeah. He said, well, write the book. It was that simple. He said, write the book. So the writing process started in March of 2019, ended with a final manuscript at the end of July. So it happened very quickly. And the result that I produced, I thought was a good result and something which can be operationalized by a wide range of folks. And I hope that's the way it gets used as it will continue. It is evergreen. I don't think trustworthy is going to drop out of the top 20 anytime soon as a quality of a person that's important. So I think it'll serve a useful purpose, and I hope people will find it on any one of the book selling places. Amazon, obviously, it's there in hardback, paperback, and an audio version, which I voiced myself. That was another interesting life experience, was listening to myself read a book out loud. But anyway, so that's pretty much it. And I would love to see people get my book and read it. And I plan on reading it soon. I put it on my list for 2024. I'm going to read my book. But it probably isn't no surprise. I have the book nearby pretty much all the time. I met, I'll close with this self-effacing story. I was visiting one of my union clients in Philadelphia, and I was asked to come to their staff meeting so that the business manager, the boss, could say, well, I want everybody to meet Dennis Doran, blah blah blah. And before the meeting started, one of the business agents walked me over to this individual and said, "Hey, Mike, I wanted you to meet Dennis." And he starts to laugh a little bit, and he said, "Man, it's so funny because I just noticed last night your book is sitting on my nightstand." And so of course I had to ask a question. I said, "But have you read it?" And he kind of hemmed and hawed. I said, "Well, do you at least flip it over once in a while and dust it so it stays clean on both sides?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I keep it nice and clean." So anyway, so there we go. Soft as steel on the bedstand.
Nice. And then related to those, you have a lot of conversations in your book, and you also have conversations with people like me on your podcast, Soft as Steel, which is also available everywhere where you listen to podcasts,
Yeah.
which is good. And can you give us just a little pitch and insights into what people can get out of listening to your podcast?
Just they're all conversations. As you know, I mean, there was no pre-planning, no agreement on questions to be asked or topics to be covered, regardless of who the speaker was. I simply said, I'm going to write a little introduction about you, and we're going to have a conversation for 30 or 35 minutes. The conversations, every conversation mentions somewhere and touched somewhere on my 4 areas of interest: love, inclusion, social justice, and leadership. May not touch on all of them, but generally a couple, 2 to 4 of them are mentioned every conversation, because that's all that continues to be important to me. I've had, and I'm talking about things that are relevant to this point in time, as this conversation is taking place, as well as looking back a bit, but more importantly, looking forward. So I've had some particularly interesting conversations with women leaders. Because again, the issue of women in the construction industry continues to be a front burner topic. And depending on who you're talking to or talking with, it's either the kind of conversation I think it needs to be, or it's a troublesome conversation. And that's also the case when you talk about people of color, and you talk about other different kinds of things that differentiate people. That's why I talk about inclusion, about everybody being part of the future of the construction industry. And they're fun conversations. Not as much fun, however, as this conversation was. But I think I was able to take an otherwise very sensible, balanced, and serious young person and turn him into a laughing nutcase. And I mean that with all respect. But that's what and it's good stuff. They run 30 or so minutes. You can listen to them in the car when you're driving to a job site, when you're driving home from work, and it's just a lot of good stuff being talked about that's relevant.
Yeah, I agree, and it's perfect. It's the perfect length, 30 minutes, once a week episode, very consistent. Every Tuesday, you get a new episode, and it's the perfect episode to listen to for a commute. My commute's about 30 minutes long, and I'm able to get an episode in on my commute once a week. I really appreciate it. I actually shared your podcast whenever we first did my interview, and a couple of different senior leaders in my organization listened to an episode of your podcast, or 2 or 3 or 4, and all of them had nice things to say, and I had them pull me aside, say, "Hey, that's a cool podcast. We listened to this episode of this leader in this other construction company, and I really enjoyed listening to it." So it's a good podcast to listen to. That's some feedback from me to you, from my people to your people. But it's a great listen, and you guys should give it a listen. It's Soft as Steel, the same title as the book.
Yeah.
And then lastly, Dennis, you are a keynote speaker. You have guests on your podcast. How can people reach you if they are interested in sharing their story and joining you in one of your conversation pieces, or they want you to share your story on their podcast or at their event?
I'm very accessible through LinkedIn messaging. I've got a what do we call it? Things you can click on something on my webpage that says talk to Dennis directly, and you can go direct to my calendar and grab an appointment to talk to me. I'd be happy to do that. And all my other contact information is there as well, including my email address. So there's 3 easy ways to get a hold of me, and I'm delighted. I never, if I see an appointment pop up on my calendar and I don't recognize who the person is, all I do is confirm the appointment and look forward to the conversation. So if you got some of your listeners and they want to hear a little bit more, or want a little more understanding about anything I talked about today during this 5-hour podcast recording. Oh no, it's not. It's only 4.5 hours. Never mind. So.
Yeah, right. And your website is
Dennis Doran Speaking, all one word. Dennis Doran with 2 N's in Dennis and speaking at the end.com. And I've been wondering. I'm thinking maybe I should change it to soft as steel. I don't know, but it's Dennis Doran because I speak. I do speak. It's like my son says, people pay me to speak. So it's Dennis Doran Speaking. That's never mind. I'm not changing it. That's the correct, so anyway.
Thanks so much, Dennis. And for those of you that are lazier, you can just go into the show notes of this episode of the podcast. You can find a link to that in the show notes, or you can find it in the YouTube description if you watch on YouTube, where you should be commenting, liking, subscribing, and sharing with your mother, your brother, your sisters, and anybody other. Well, Dennis, thank you so much for joining us this week. And thank you for spending the day after Thanksgiving, your Black Friday, with me. I appreciate the time and the story. And I look forward to listening to this back over once I'm done editing it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just make sure you get all of me out of it. Then it's going to be about the right length.
Oh, no, never.
Absolutely my pleasure to talk to you again, Daniel.
All right. Thank you so much, Dennis.
Miscommunicating. I just made a pilot, then they threw me on the stations. Now I'm not complaining, my thoughts get complicated, I cannot explain in layman's. Never losing focus because I ain't chasing payments. Still playing in the basement while I'm working on arrangements. They heard the kid in 50 countries, thank God that's amazing. But I'd rather thank Spotify, they put me on the stage.